Welcome to the Screen Podcast. I'm Matt Mueller, Editor-in-Chief of Screen International. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a bonus episode of the Screen Podcast, which is focused on South Africa's entry to this year's international feature Oscar race, The Heart is a Muscle. This special award season episode is brought to you in partnership with the Star Film Company. The Heart is a Muscle is written and directed by Imran Hamdulay. The film premiered at the Berlin International Film Festival earlier this year, and it's Imran's feature debut, centering on a young father whose violent reaction to his son's brief disappearance sets off an unexpected chain of events. And in this bonus episode, Imran is joined by his lead actor from the film, Keenan Arrison, for an in-depth discussion about the film's themes and production journey, hosted by Screen International's senior US critic, Tim Grierson. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Tim, Imran, and Keenan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Grierson. I am the senior US critic for Screen, and I'm very happy to be moderating this conversation about The Heart is a Muscle, which is South Africa's official entry for the Best International Feature Film Oscar. So The Heart is a Muscle premiered at the Berlin Film Festival this year in the Panorama section and took home the Ecumenical Jury Prize. So we're really pleased to have today both writer-director Imran Hamdulay and the star of The Heart is a Muscle, Keenan Arrison. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being here with me today to talk about the movie. Congratulations on a really moving and thoughtful drama. And the first thing I wanted to do, I guess, was talk to Imran about just sort of inspirations. I'm always interested, especially because this is your first feature, this is your feature debut. Does a story like this, does it start with a character, Ryan, played by Keenan, or is it about a theme that you're thinking about and then a character emerges from that?
You know, Tim, it's a funny story. The premise of the film was actually inspired by a real life incident where myself and, like my best friends I've known for like 25, 30 years, we were having a barbecue at his place. And his name, quite funnily, is Ryan. I just kind of use the same name. I have no imagination. I use all my friends' names in the film. And while we were barbecuing, his son went missing. His son's 5 years old. And and we're all close. So we just instinctively, everyone jumped into action. You went there, we went there, we jumped in our cars, Jason Bourne, everyone screeching around corners. And I'd never seen fear in my friend's eyes like that, just absolute, the unimaginable things running through his mind. Anyway, his kid was found. He was just kind of like he was a prank. He was naughty, just a little bit mischievous, and everything was fine. But when that happened, and I saw the interaction between the two of them, I'd never seen anger in my friend like that before. Now the film is not about my friend. That was simply the genesis of the film that sparked that curiosity of like, oh, I've got something here. This is kind of interesting. And beyond that, I kind of sat with it. I sat with the character. I sat with the stories because I had to write the film quite quickly. I wrote the film in 2 months, and we shot our second draft. Um, and I think I was in this like privileged position where, and it sounds so trite to say this, where the kind of story came to me, and I had to be open to it. And that thing that I've only heard writers talk about, where the character starts talking to you, and you just kind of like, you got to listen to it, and the story kind of like the process becomes an organism that's got its own life, and you really have to show up for that. So in a way, the themes, I allow the themes to present themselves in an organic way without overthinking things. But it was when we started getting into the making of the film, and I started talking to Keenan, I was kind of discovering, oh, this is what the film is really about. This is, and that's why I loved working with Keenan on this, because it wasn't just me auditioning or proposing a story to Keenan. It was Keenan also part of that process, and us both kind of involved and on this journey of discovery. So yeah, that was kind of where the origins of where this film was born from.
Before I bring Keenan into this talk, you've talked about this before, Imran, about this idea that you almost sort of discovered what the movie was about as you were making it and as you were talking to Keenan. I guess I'm curious, like, because for me watching the film, two things come through very strongly, two themes. One is this idea about masculinity and what masculinity looks like. And the other one is about fathers and sons. And I guess I wondered, were those things, they must have been conscious in you as you were writing the script, but in terms of that evolution of, as you put it, oh, now I see what this movie is also about. What else kind of emerged in terms of either talking to Keenan or just making the film that you realize, oh, this film is also about these other things as well?
I think, I love that question. Thank you. Going into the part of the writing process, something landed where I was like, oh, that's what I'm dealing with, and it was the idea, thinking often about, what our fathers pass on to us, what we pass on to our sons, and what does intergenerational passing mean? And that's passing of memories, that's passing of violence, it's passing of many things. And I think often, in discussions and discourse around intergenerational passings, we talk about generational trauma. We talk about intergenerational violence. And what's always stuck with me before thinking about this film was, I lost my dad when I was a kid, and he was a great man. He was a community leader. He was a well-known anti-apartheid activist. And I always thought, I'd love for us to talk more about these topics within the framework of intergenerational healing. What does that look like? What does intergenerational forgiveness and joy look like, that we take? Not to discount these other very real, like parts of it that should be included and spoken about. But I think that was very much, something that I carried and throughout filming, absolutely every single day. And Keenan can absolutely confirm this. The spirit that I tried my best to infuse into the set, the shoot, the camera, and especially the performance was to always be led by kindness. And again, not discounting the what is the conflicts we're dealing with, but always to arrive at a place of kindness. And then this was always the question with Keenan and the other actors. We'd sit down, we'd read through the scene before we're shooting, and we'd see, okay, where's the kindness in the scene that we need to find? That's what we need to find. You know what I mean? And that went through the process with my editor as well. And it's such a lovely experience, I was blessed, throughout the process.
Yes, let me ask Keenan about that. It's a lovely performance, by the way. I'm curious about, like what Imran is talking about was that evident just on the script level, or maybe a better way of putting it is, how did the two of you first start the conversation about the movie? Did he give you the script? Did he tell you about the story in terms of like initial meetings and sort of this underlying idea that kindness is something that we're leading with? I guess I'm curious for you how it started for you.
Thanks, Tim. I guess we started off just conversing about character and story and the idea. I mean, where the project was born from, or the idea for this project. But I think from the get-go, kindness or vulnerability or being gentle was always at the top of the list for Imran. And so it was easy for me because he came with a full Bible of and very detailed about how we will approach not just the character and the story and world, but also how we'll approach the process of shooting. And I think from day one, the feeling was pretty much set that this film would sort of lead us down this path of finding vulnerability and being gentle, not just with the character and without any judgment, but also with just each other on set, which was lovely. And I think Imran did such a great job with his casting. that everybody by day 2 was essentially became a family, and so it was easy to come to set and work every day and work through those processes and how to approach every scene, how to approach the character's sort of emotional state at one time. But yeah, from the get-go, I could really say that always led with kindness and so without judgment, if you will.
Because one of the things, Keenan, I was really interested in is when the film premiered at Berlin, you gave an interview and you talked about the fact that you describe yourself as sort of I think you used the word soft or sweet to describe yourself. But obviously Ryan, the character that you play in the film, is somebody who, can have violent outbursts, can be susceptible to violence. And he has, I don't want to reveal too much for people who haven't seen the movie, but he has this dark past that he's trying to kind of combat. I'm interested for you in terms of an actor. Kindness seems like you as a person completely understand that, and vulnerability, you completely understand that. But to play someone who also has this other side and this darker side that in some ways he is trying his best to shed. Tapping into that yourself, were you able to sort of find those aspects of yourself? Were you drawing from maybe other people that you know in your own life? How does that happen for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on. My approach. I mean, just as Keenan, I'm a gentle person. I mean, we come from communities like this. We know friends like this who have come from broken homes or, broken families. So it wasn't hard to be able to find somebody like Ryan, but it also allowed me to look deeper within myself and find where does my trauma sit? What is my generational trauma? What's the relationship with my father? I lost my dad, I think a few months after shooting this film. And only then did it occur to me that I needed to really rediscover myself and what the relationship was with my dad, what his relationship was with his dad. So it really, really pushed me to investigate a little bit more deeper and what that looked like. I mean, I don't want to say that it's easy to find a character like Ryan and suddenly adapt, those mannerisms and behavioral patterns and all of that, but it really actually needed me to go deeper within myself as the actor playing this role. I guess once we got onto set, shooting on those locations, it really made it easy to really envelop the world and really to be able to immerse myself and be present with every moment. I think it was harder to sort of work against the grain of who I am. It's easy to.
Can I just?
Sure.
Please.
Yeah.
I was say, sorry to interrupt. Can I add there? During casting, so I've seen Keenan's performances in some of the films he's done, especially the debut film of Oliver Manus. And that was done in 2008 to 2009. I always remembered that performance. And what I saw in that was Keenan's ability to ground a film, in a very, very uninhibited way. And I was so lucky, and I was so thankful that Keenan, he's in almost every scene of the film, almost, like I'd say like 95% of the film. And as an actor and as a professional, that was, something outside of all the brilliant artistic contributions he made, just as a personality, to be able to not just inhibit your character, but on set to ground the film, and carry other actors and allow space for other actors to feel like they're also part of the story. And that was a really important part that I really appreciated,
Yeah, I mean, it brings to mind, Keenan, you talked about being on the locations also. The film is set in Cape Town, but specifically in Cape Flats. And you would know better than I, but I feel like sort of historically, Cape Flats is often thought of as a poor region of the city is often depicted as being sort of crime-ridden like that. And I'm curious about making a film that's set in Cape Flats that tries to sort of push against sort of those stereotypes that people might have about that area.
Yeah, it definitely it's. I think it's not. Yes, it is the intention, but not so much as we all come from this area. Myself, most of the crew, most of the cast, and going into it, I don't know. Just to give some historical context, the area we shot in Cape Flats is the area that people of color were forcibly removed to during apartheid. It was one of the biggest displacement of South Africans out of affluent, wealthy areas in Cape Town into the outskirts, where the spaces they lived in were far from the oceans, far from work centers, so that's the context. And there was an intentional withholding of service deliveries that would uplift communities, and what that meant was over the years some neighborhoods have been, gangsterism has taken hold, drug use has taken hold, but it's such a big area and there's so many people and it's such a vibrant mix of race, religions. And for me, it was frustrating in the way my community and this area has been portrayed in cinema within South Africa to a large degree. And I felt a responsibility, to re-represent that narrative, to show, that, yeah, there is a deep historical violence that we've inherited and the scars of that live and very much exist in the soil, but there's also defiance, deep defiance, a lot of our activists, our veteran heroes, anti-apartheid heroes come from that area. Some of the greatest music in South Africa, from hip hop to jazz, come from that area. And I just thought, it deserved a level of dignity in the way it's presented. And I hope it offers that while still offering the complexities that exist, yeah, Keenan, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I think Imran's covered it, but the film, the Cape Flats, or the area that we shot, those locations definitely come through as characters as part of this film, and they play such strong imagery on screen, and I think what it does for the film, it brings out the colorful sort of nature of areas like that. The other side of joy. I remember standing on set and we'd be surrounded by kids, but in an area where there shouldn't be laughter, or you think there shouldn't be laughter and joyfulness and playfulness, which was all around us all the time. So it was easy to be able to sort of connect and root, I guess, performances, especially being on those locations on those days. And just the kindness of the people in that area, allowing us to come into their homes and just having open hearts, open doors. And, it does speak to what Imran says. We come from, there's this other side, there's this history of violence and complete poverty or whatever, but there's the other side of it. There's complete happiness and joyfulness. And we I think, to represent Cape Flats or Cape Town or those areas in this way is it's really it's a privilege to be able to do that. Like Imran said, we so used to seeing films from South Africa set in these locations that speak to the darker side of those areas and the community.
Tim, I'd love to share something with you. We haven't spoken about this in any of the interviews we've given. That's a scoop.
I'm all ears, yeah.
Yeah. In the lead up to the shoot, while I was doing all my scouting, I know, I have a relationship with many of my closest friends come from there, have a background being reformed gangsters. So I have a deep relationship with a lot of the people there. I held multiple meetings with the gang leaders, the gang bosses in those areas. And at first they were just kind of like, look, guys, like, we know, like, we know each other. We don't mind you being here doing this, but we've seen this. And they were deeply knowledgeable about how the area has been portrayed. And there was this like really interesting dialogue that was happening where they were like, yo, we don't want to keep being portrayed that way, and they assumed that's what we were doing. And I actually showed them my deck, and they weren't interested in reading the script. I showed them as much, as I could, and I explained to them what we're doing. And it was really moving to see this like feared gang leader engage in a conversation where he said, yo, man, I appreciate what you guys are doing. And we said and the area we shot in, that specific area with the blocks, no one had shot there before because it's deemed too dangerous. And all the gang leaders, they said, you know what, you guys can come in. If this is what you're doing, come in. You've got our full protection. You've got full access anywhere. If anyone gives you trouble, we are there, And it was kind of surreal, but it was also, there was something that was heartful about hearing that there are people there who are so aware of how they are being, how a single story is being told about those communities outside of them, and they don't have control of it. That's
Yeah, and for people when they see the movie, I think that they will notice that it feels much more nuanced and it doesn't feel cliched in terms of how that community is portrayed. And there's like much more kind of like sensitivity may not be the right word, but there is like a nuance and a specificity of how it's portrayed, I think is really interesting. One of the other things I want to ask about is, we talked briefly about masculinity early on, and it's mostly about fathers and sons, like I mentioned. But I was also really kind of interested in the fact that though the movie is primarily about its male characters, there are many female characters in the film. Ryan has a wife. Some of the people around Ryan have significant others, girlfriends, wives, and things like that. And I was struck by the fact that, by and large, these women love their men, but don't feel like they really understand them. And maybe vice versa, that the men don't really understand the women. It feels like something that is very telling in the story, Imran. I guess I was sort of interested in this idea of, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but there's almost an idea of like all the women in your movie, they don't entirely understand their men, because in some ways the men don't understand themselves and can't talk about sort of feelings and like that. So for Imran, I guess I'm sort of curious about that, how that theme of masculinity plays out in terms of how we see the women characters in your movie.
Yeah. Man, absolutely what you said. I think there's a difficulty of communication between the men and their partners in the film and the women and their partners in the film, simply because these men don't know themselves. They trying to figure that out, and they fumbling through this process of trying to figure themselves out. And I always saw the female characters and the women as incredibly important. I wanted them to act as a sort of moral compass, but without overburdening them with responsibility to fix anyone. That was very important, and I hope that comes through in the film. The way I always looked at it was, over and above, like, I think the cliche of like, oh, the women are holding space for the men. I felt like that's a bit too easy of a reach. The way I always saw it in the discussions I had with some of those most brilliant actresses was, I always see it as the women are holding almost a mirror of endurance to their partners, more than like coddling them. It's to be there as a partner that has endured as a woman in this world certain difficulties, and now offering that sort of strength to their to the men in their lives. Because I've always approached Ryan's character, especially in the sense that he's looking for a lost kid. But he is the lost kid. Ryan's the lost kid. He's trying to find his dad, and his dad's trying to find him. Yeah. I think that's always how I approached it.
Yeah, I'm curious for you, Keenan, in terms of playing that aspect of it, because you have several, really affecting scenes, Ryan and his wife, where he finally starts to unburden himself and finally start to begin that process of sort of talking about it. In terms of sort of preparing those scenes or working with your scene partner, I'd love to hear about that.
All credit, I think, to Melissa, who plays my wife, Melissa DeFries. I mean, she fully understood exactly every beat of the story that Ryan was sort of going through at any given time. And what she did brilliantly was not just as a person, not just as a scene partner, but as the character. I could feel, I can tell you, Tim, I didn't feel like I was acting opposite a scene partner or another actor. It was, we were literally living in the moment. And I think those were the discussions we had early on with Imran and how we would approach those scenes, and I think what Melissa did, I mean, the other women as well, Robin and Lauren, just absolutely amazing. But what Melissa did so beautifully was to just allow Layla, allow Ryan to be. And I mean, I think there's a line in the film. She goes, "I don't want to lose you. You won't lose me, but I don't want you to lose yourself." So it's that quiet sort of strength that also challenges Ryan to start feeling the pain, and confront the pain that he's dealing with. And I think so many women they sit so quietly with that strength and they support their men every day, without fail. And I think all credit. I think one of those scenes that you're talking about is, I don't think I would have been able to be in that moment and have those moments if it wasn't someone like Melissa, an actress like Melissa, yeah. And I think all the women, but she really, really just, I know you don't like it, man, but she held space. She did. I'm sorry. I just had to say it. No, she did. And yeah, all credit to her. I really don't think, and the interesting thing was Melissa and I never spoke prior to doing that one big scene. We never spoke how we would approach it, or I'm going to feel this, or I'll do this. These actions will come at any given time. It was literally, you could see her listening to me, and it was just so beautiful. I mean, I get emotional thinking about it, but it's for any actor to have someone to work opposite them in that way. I think it's a blessing.
You know what I love Tim, in that scene, we didn't rehearse. So we didn't rehearse at all in the film, anything. And especially that scene, we didn't rehearse that scene. But what we did was we spoke quite a lot about like the extenuating circumstances around the scene, what's happening around this, And like I loved going into that scene and watching them completely just take responsibility. I could never have imagined or directed, something like that with any kind of detail. It would just been impossible, and it only takes like really great actors to take the words and be like, cool, I get it. Let's go. Let's shoot this,
I mean, that scene, Tim, I might be giving some secrets away, but I mean that, like, I know Imran said we didn't rehearse, but there was so much dialogue and conversation that happened prior to even the film starting principal photography. I think we shot that scene towards the end of it or in the middle of our skit. And the only, I wouldn't say note, but the only question Imran asked me was, you're okay, right? You've got this. I mean, it's like, okay, stand by, go.
That was my biggest director's note before going into that scene. I was like, "Are you good? You want to do this?" He's like, "Yeah, let's go."
Yeah, and I mean, to have freedom. I mean, not every actor has the freedom or the luxury of having someone like Imran to go, listen, we're not going to rehearse the death out of the scene, or we're not, but you've got this, and I trust you enough to I guess deliver. Yeah.
I want to thank you both so much for being here and talking to us about the film. We were talking today with writer-director Imran Hamdulay and star Keenan Arrison. The film, again, is The Heart is a Muscle, which is South Africa's official submission for Best International Feature Film. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
for
Tim.
having us.
Yes.
Thank you to Tim, Imran, and Keenan for an insightful conversation about The Heart is a Muscle. Thank you again to our partner on this episode, the Star Film Company. And thank you for tuning in and listening to this episode of the Screen Podcast. We'll see you again soon.